All right, hello everybody. Welcome back to CHRTC 309. This is obviously sociology of youth and religion. All right, so in this lecture and in the following one, we're going to look at this update from Springtide Institute that came out in the fall of 2023. So it slightly updates the numbers from their Faith Unbundled materials. And giving us an idea, what the state of youth and religion look like, kind of at the end of 2023. So relatively new data, and then digging into some questions they asked about young people's experiences of the sacred. All right, so I'm very excited about this. Springtide is now the recipient of a great big research grant to continue doing research on youth and religion, which is awesome because it means that their research and their data collection is better than ever. All right, so for the 2023 version of this research, they surveyed 4,546 young people between the ages of 13 and 25 and balanced the census splits for age, gender, region, and ethnicity, right? So to get a representative sample. This comes with a 99% confidence interval and a 2% margin of error, plus or minus. So very good research. They also did, along with this, and this we'll probably discuss a little bit more when we talk about the sense of the sacred, 35 60-minute interviews with young people. All right, so one of the things that's very exciting about this for me is that in the 2022 State of Youth and Religion, Springtide Institute did not reveal or release an overall picture of youth and religion in America. So it's been 2 whole years since I had a breakdown of what youth and religion sort of looks like. All right, so on the right, here, 2021, on the left, I guess you're staring at it, it's the left. If you're looking at the screen, it's the left. And the right, you have 2023. Okay, so a couple of things to note. Basically, we have just Christian down by 3% and Protestant up by 3%. Roman Catholic still holding at 16%. So that's interesting. This means that Christian amongst young people are 13 to 25-year-olds in this sample in both years were 54%. So in this 2-year period, we have not seen a lot of movement in terms of Christian. However, the next category, dun, 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 dun. All right, sorry, I'm very excited about this. I shouldn't be this excited about a bunch of data. We've had a shift here, right? In our 2021 sample, nothing in particular, which was in orange. I wish they kept the colors the same. They didn't know I would be doing this. Thank you to Springtide for putting this out, and I'm using their graphics. I didn't make these, but I wish they kept the colors consistent. All right. So in 2021, as depicted in orange, nothing in particular was 8%. It's in red here in 2023, and it's now up to 15%. So it's a solid 7% growth for nothing in particular. Now, something else, which was in orange in 2020, it's in orange in 2023. It was kind of teal in 2021. It is up a single percentage. Atheist and agnostic, both down to 6%. Now, again, this is not the same people, right? This is a slightly different sample. All of this is this is within the margin of error, right? This is just a little bit. So the atheist agnostic number. I'm moving my mouse, but you won't be able to see that. The atheist and agnostic numbers, from 8% to 6%, that's within the 2% margin of error, right? So kind of expected. That stuff's gonna shift around like that. The just Christian shift downward by 3%. It's just outside the margin of error. The rise, for Protestant up to 19% is just outside the margin of error, right? It's not too far. So we're talking maybe 1-ish% growth and 1-ish% shrinkage. Who knows? But yeah, so atheist and agnostic definitely haven't seen growth. Nothing in particular, though, way outside the margin of error. So a lot more young people in, um, in 2023 are calling themselves nothing in particular, right? So that is some news worth having. So our kind of, no religion categories, and I'm having, nothing in particular, atheist, agnostic, and something else, has gone up to about 35%, up from about 29% in 2021. So again, it's small growth within the margin of error. Our Mormons are up 1%, again, margin of error. What's the brown? Mormons, Greek Orthodox, what was or brown was Muslim before, right? So all this, the rest of this stuff is kind of within the margin of error, and it's unfortunately kind of change as goes the religious landscape. Okay, so no really big shifts, right, between the years. A little bit of a shifting around, maybe in terms of defining yourself as either just Protestant, or just Christian. Nothing in particular, considerably larger. Everything else sort of in margin of error territory, and a bit of growth for these categories of this solid third of the circle that's non-religious. Okay, so again, this is different kind of numbers than we've seen, maybe different estimates than we might have seen from Pew. I think no less valid, not benchmarked against the U.S. Census again, because you can't. But really, I think kind of an interesting picture here, just kind of painting a slow rise in, non-religious. But it isn't, growing in 2 years. It didn't grow enormously. So I think that's really kind of interesting. Okay, so other interesting kind of information. A pretty vast majority of young people say they are either slightly religious or slightly spiritual. Now, I always wonder when the word slightly, I don't love it in social science research because it's sort of like being slightly pregnant. You are, I think, religious, or you are spiritual, or you aren't. I don't know that I love the categorization of slightly, but whatever, not my survey. So 68% of young people say they are slightly religious, so better than 2/3 still, and this is all Gen Z, right? Which makes me wonder if maybe the doomin' and gloomin', that I've been propagating this whole course was a little bit too doomy and a little too gloomy. 78% say they are at least slightly spiritual. Okay, and again, like here I think, well, we just solved the secularization debate. Rodney Stark was right. Every slide should be Rodney Stark was right. Rodney Stark was right. 78% of Gen Z says they are at least slightly spiritual. This is not something you would expect from fully secular people, right? That better than 3/4 say that they are slightly spiritual. Okay, that doesn't mean it's deep within them, but they're definitely not, irreligious completely. And 61%, right? So not quite 2/3, but getting close, identifies both at least slightly religious and at least slightly spiritual. So in terms of religion and spirituality, if I was looking at this number, I'd be feeling pretty good. If I was, a religious leader saying, man, I'm worried about the future of religion or spirituality in America, I'd be looking at this number and saying, I'm quite happy with this. This looks really good. Okay, 68% of young people agree. There are many religions I agree with. This is consistent, I think, with the Faith Unbundled data, right? So consistency again across multiple surveys is good news. And 58% of them say, I do not feel like I need to connect to one specific religion. So better than half don't feel like they need to be connected to one specific religion, right? They're probably making up this hodgepodgey religion of their own. And 68% say there's more than one religion they agree with. 28% of young people say they've become more religious in the past few years. Sorry, I'm immediately thinking, is this Rodney Stark? Again, is this self-limiting secularization? Almost a third of young people saying they've become more religious or spiritual in the past few years. is an interesting, it's not, I mean, it's more, I guess, a little bit over a quarter, but that's a significant number, a quite significant number. So are we looking at a self-limit of secularization? I don't know that the data points that strongly in that direction. I don't want to be that definitive about it, but it's definitely interesting, right? Like that kind of growth, I think, is interesting. I don't know what else to say about it, so I'm going to move on to the next slide. Okay, this is the chart that makes me want to hurt myself a little bit. Okay. So, all right, I'll give it to the agnostics. I'm okay with the agnostics, right? I'm okay. I'm okay. I can live with this, I think. All right, so among agnostics, and agnostics, in theory, if you understand the definition of what an agnostic actually is, right, this is someone, again, it comes from the Greek a for no, and gnosis for knowledge. So people who say that they do not have enough knowledge in order to make any kind of claim as to the truth or falsehood of religion, or of the existence of God, or whatever. However, 28%, or better than 3/4 of those, or sorry, 1/4 of those people say that they are religious, suggesting to me that they do not know what the word agnostic means. 66%, so 2/3 of agnostics say they are spiritual. All right, trust the poll. This next one hurts me a lot. All the rest of these are perfectly explicable, honestly. The atheists from the Greek a and theos for no, theos, God. 11% of atheists say they are religious. 42% say they are spiritual. Now, this might be just me, having grown up and really lived through, some of my formative years in the sort of post 9/11 new atheist sort of world. And I've already talked about this, and folks like, Richard Dawkins and all of these delightful things that I've already spouted off about. No problem. I've always associated atheism and atheists with a philosophical materialism, which, to my mind, has always precluded both the idea, basically, a complete naturalism, which presumes that, the universe is just a bunch of atoms. You are just a bunch of atoms. I am just a bunch of atoms. We are meat flying through the universe. There is no such thing as a spirit. There's certainly no such thing as a God in the kind of materialist, atheism that I am familiar with. So I am surprised that 11% of atheists say that they are religious, and 42% say that they are spiritual, which again I find interesting because unless I'm misunderstanding the definition of atheism, the atheist shouldn't believe that you have a spirit, and therefore shouldn't believe that you can be spiritual. Okay, I think my problem here, and this is something that is honestly difficult to grasp for me, is that I expect people to be intellectually consistent, right? And I want to put people in these bright lined little boxes, right? So I want to draw a nice little, square box around atheism. I want to kind of distinguish it, based on some characteristic that I think it should have. One of which is that the religious should be 0 and spiritual should be 0. However, people are not like that. People are not intellectually consistent. People may not understand what an atheist really is or what, my definition of it should be. And so, we may not have a lot of intellectual consistency. I mean, what this, I think, potentially suggests also is that Christian Smith is probably correct. So Christian Smith, at the end of his book, Religion, What It Is, How It Works, and Why It Matters, which I use extensively in my class, it's just straight up sociology of religion, suggests that at our core, human beings have religious potential. Not that we're naturally religious or inherently religious, but that human beings at least have the potential to be religious, right? Any person at any given time could become religious given the right set of circumstances. And what I think I see in these atheist numbers and in these agnostic numbers, and I mean, if you look down, towards the middle here, at nothing in particular, right? Our friends right here. 61%. So they look very much like the agnostics, right? Like 28% say they're religious. Odd for the nothing in particular, but okay. And 61% say that they are spiritual, slightly, moderately, or very. So there appears to be, even in those categories, of people who say that they are kind of, in that category that we would class as no religion among young people, a lot of religious potential, right? 2/3 of agnostics are spiritual, say they're, slightly, moderately, or very spiritual, suggesting that they could move up that scale, right? 28% of them, almost 30%, say that they are religious, suggesting that they could move up that scale. Atheists, 11% say they are religious, right? And 42%, not quite half, but 2/5 say that they are slightly, moderately, or very spiritual. And I want to hit my head against the table. But it suggests they have religious potential. At least some of them do, right? Something that could, and that they could still move into these other categories, right? Whatever those categories happen to be, right? The rest of this is completely unsurprising and is barely worth mentioning, right? Buddhists, 80% are religious, 89% are spiritual. All of these, we see high levels of people saying they're religious. Muslims are extremely religious. Wow, 94%. Cool, awesome sauce. Protestants, so there's our evangelicals, probably 90%. Catholics still holding out pretty good at 87%. 85% spiritual, right? Something else, we don't know what's in there. It's just a grab bag of everything that's left. 50%, 57%, better than half say they're religious, and nearly 90% say they are 90% say that they are slightly, moderately, or very spiritual. And then those with 2 or more affiliations, which is an interesting category, right? Probably some mix in here. We see, I think, maybe the negative effects of having, 2 or more affiliations. I would guess in here, their parents probably, maybe one parent is Buddhist, one parent is Catholic, or something like this. There's no way to know what's in this data. But, they're less religious, 2/3, and less spiritual. So, obviously less so than people of a unified identity. Okay, so some more interesting data. So 31% of our Gen Z, so almost a third, have never participated in an organized religion or spiritual community. There's your cradle nuns, right? What Deason's term for the cradle nuns. Not quite a third of our Gen Z sample here are cradle nuns. They have never been part of an organized religion or spiritual community, raised either anti-religiously or a-religiously. Okay. 30%, so not a big difference. 30% currently participate in organized religion. So these two are kind of neck and neck. And then 39% used to participate, right? So the biggest part of the sample, almost 40%, used to participate in a organized religion or spiritual community. So there's a lot of people who have sort of, stepped away, right? So, I mean, what it suggests is that there's at least, if we look at our total sample, right, 54% of our sample were Christian, more than that are religious, but 40% of all the people are religious. So outside of that, 35% that were, that 35% that are no religion category, which included something else, is probably a little bit too high. some percentage of that is still holding on to a religious identity, though not participating in an organized religious community. Okay. Trust organized religion. As you can see, trust completely or trust a lot at 28%. Just nudges out do not trust at all, which is 27. So there's about a quarter, a little more than a quarter of young people who trust religion completely or a lot, or trust organized religion completely or a lot. A little over a quarter of them who don't trust religion at all, and just shy of half that trust it somewhat. So there's this big kind of moderate middle ground. But for the most part, right, there's not a lot of trust in organized religion, right? It's sorry, I said 28, 82% of the sample trust it somewhat or not at all. So definitely, for religious leaders, a lot of work to be done with Gen Z around, trust in religion. No other way to say it. Okay, so oodalali, golly, what a day. Yeah, so this is how often people attend religious services, and we see from the bottom of this chart, right, and from this 38% who say never, that 4 out of 10 young people in the sample never attend religious services, right? And again, I don't know that this is all that kind of novel. Yeah, I think this has been true for a long time. It just got hidden in data in the past, but at the end of the day, 38% never attend religious services, right? All right, so more than once a week. So this are extremely religiously committed, like very religiously committed. More than once a week is only 4%, right? Not surprising. Every week, 13%. So there's a solid 17% of young people who are going, every week at least. So almost a fifth. If you had 2 to 3 times a month to that number, 17, 26, about a quarter, a little over a quarter, right, of young people attend at least several times a month. So that seems pretty consistent with a lot of kind of what we've seen, right? Several times a month, about a quarter, not surprising. At least once a month. We're now in. I lost count again. 36%. So it's close to those never, and a big kind of 27% of the sample, better than a quarter, go 1 to 3 times a year. So they're infrequent attenders. So, this is all, I think, very interesting information. Definitely the nevers is the biggest single group in there, right? The monthly attenders is about a quarter never go. And then there's a 10% that, essentially go at least once a month, right? So they're somewhat religiously involved. They're probably kind of religiously moderate. All good there. So interesting, right? We definitely see that there's a split and a polarization in there. Okay, really interesting stuff here as well. While you may, okay, here, this is interesting. The way they ask this. While you may engage in the following everyday activities, how often do you engage in these activities as religious or spiritual practice? Percentages of young people responding daily or weekly, right? So 45%, of the young people in the sample said they pray daily or weekly as a spiritual practice. 49% say they read. It's almost half. What are they reading? I don't know. Is it a sacred text? That would seem like the logical explanation, but it's not necessarily true. Interestingly, right, 54% spend time in nature. And this is a really, really common Gen Z sort of thing. I've heard this a ton. in other kind of research that spending time in nature is a way that Gen Zers experience God, and 56% engage in art, right? So, over half of them do some kind of art, something that's creative as a spiritual or religious practice. So again, I think this is a very kind of interesting and different kind of looking religion and spirituality compared to our older generations, right? Certainly compared to what we think of. Maybe our older generations did this, and I just wasn't aware of it. But it's definitely, an interesting way to think about religion and spirituality. I'm thinking especially of these bottom two categories, right? Prayer, obviously, I think we always think of prayer as inherently religious, right? And something that religious people should be doing. Reading, again, if you're reading a sacred text, that sort of makes sense. And yeah, 54% spending time in nature, though. That's really interesting. Really interesting that that's what's kind of coming out, right? That this is considered a spiritual or religious practice, spending time in nature, or engaging in art or some kind of creativity. Okay. Sorry, there's a little bit of a warp in this. I'm scanning these out of the book, and I use like a thing to make them a photo negative so the images show up well. About 1/3 of young people also believe that, so they responding very true to the following statement. So about, a little bit more than a third, right? 36% see evidence of a higher power in nature and creation. Really interesting, really cool stat. 36% say a higher power shows up in a variety of ways in their life. Again, really cool. So, a little bit over a third, see a higher power in their life. And 34%, feel that God is present in both tragic and joyful events. So about a third for all of these three statements, right? So about a third, I would say, these are pretty traditional religious statements, and that probably kind of matches up with our about a third of young people attending religious services a couple times a month. All right, but more young people report feeling connected to the natural environment than to a higher power, right? So if we look at, natural environment, right? We have highly, 22% say they're highly connected to nature, the natural environment more than a higher power, right? That's 18%. It's only 12% for all of humanity, because screw all of humanity, right? No, I'm kidding, of course. But, definitely that's a little bit harder thing to understand, I think. Moderately, right? It's, 28% say they feel moderately attached to a higher power. It's 36% for the natural environment, right? So then you're into like 58% for the natural environment feel either highly or moderately attached. And that's versus only 46% who feel, highly or moderately attached to a higher power. And, a solid 43% that feel attached to all of humanity. So sorry, all of humanity gets left out. They get the high number for slightly, whereas a higher power gets 30 and nature gets 30. And not at all, right? Most people feel connected to nature in some way, and that makes sense, right? We live in nature for the most part. All of humanity, well, Sheila at school was bullying me, so I don't feel that attached to all of humanity because she's part of it. And not at all, for a higher power. That kind of makes sense. Though it is, lower than our, it's lower than I would think, given our not, no religion or nothing in particular, atheist, agnostic numbers. But whatever, we know that, some of the people in those categories still feel connected to, a higher power of some kind. So, all right, so that is sort of an intro to the state of youth and religion in 2023. And we'll kind of take it from there.